being honest and upfront with the executives on what is the level of security, what is the risk, and what is or is not acceptable risk. I find it sort of funny because this idea of cybersecurity isn't hard. We've just made it hard. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, 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 welcome. Hopefully, you know what those words mean. It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly. Dr. E is in the house. It is always a pleasure and an honor to spend some time with you. And what I really want to talk about is this idea of what is really the badge of honor of being a CISO. And I always pick the title before I record based on what I think I'm going to say. And I'll be honest with you, this episode, I debated a lot on what this title should be. Should it be being authentic? Should it be understanding the real job of a CISO? Should it be recognizing that breaches will happen? Should it be embrace the breach? Should it be 100% security doesn't exist? Or I finally realized the common trend among all of this is really this idea of being honest. Being honest and upfront with the executives on what is the level of security, what is the risk, and what is or is not acceptable risk. I find it sort of funny because this idea of cybersecurity isn't hard. We've just made it hard. We've just made it a lot more difficult than it needs to be. Because at the end of the day, here's cybersecurity. We have a list of critical assets. We have a risk tolerance level of what is or is not acceptable level of risk. We then have our categories of breach of confidentiality, which is unauthorized disclosure of information, breach of integrity, which is unauthorized alteration of information or the accuracy of the information, and breach of availability, which is unauthorized denial of access to your information or your data. So really, when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're really coming back to our executives saying, okay, here's a categorized list of unacceptable risks to the organization. Here's what it's going to cost and the impact, and here's what it's going to cost to fix it. What would you like to do? In a nutshell, if we could sort of describe the role of a Chief Information Security Officer and the job of cybersecurity in an organization within 2 minutes or less, that would be the most concise way of describing it. So really, your job as a CISO is to constantly look at the risks, look at the ones that are unacceptable, work with your security team to be able to come up with appropriate, cost-effective countermeasures, and then present a list to your executives of saying, here's risks, the likelihood of it occurring, the cost if it occurs, and the cost to fix it. What would you like to do, Mr. or Mrs. Executive? And that's really the dialogue, communication, and everything that cybersecurity and the role of a CISO should focus on and center around are those specific things. And first question is, are you presenting that data? So let's look at some of the common mistakes and areas that CISOs make. First is, a CISO wants to pick a side in a fight. Security engineers, the reason why security engineers typically do not make good CISOs is because they don't understand business. A security engineer's job is to make the organization as successful as possible, which means a security engineer would spend every last penny on securing the organization because they want to make it as secure as it possibly can. They don't understand revenue. They don't understand profit. They don't understand numbers. Their job is just to make it as secure as possible. Let's find all of the risks, as many of the risks as we can. Let's identify ways to reduce those risks, and let's present all of those risks to make us as secure as we possibly can. That is what makes a world-class security engineer, and every CISO should have a world-class security engineer on their payroll, or multiple, because they need all of that data. But what a world-class CISO does is they take all of that, filter it, and go, okay, some of these are acceptable risks, some of these are within our risk tolerance, some of these are okay, some of these are acceptable, some of these are good, and then only take the ones that are unacceptable, that are really damaging, like 90% chance or higher of occurring, millions upon millions of damage to the organization, and only a few $100K to fix it. So they're going to continually filter those from a business mindset, recognizing that it's all about the business and security is secondary to support the business. Remembering one of our golden rules, if cybersecurity negatively impacts the business, cybersecurity is wrong. Right? Very important to remember as a world-class CISO, and then present that data to the executives. That's what a world-class CISO does. They're going to present the unacceptable risks that they think additional money, additional budget, and additional resources need to be put against to get us within the appropriate risk tolerance for the organization. So that brings up one of the core fundamental pieces that a CISO must own, must accept, which is this. 100% security doesn't exist in any practical sense. Now, I remember giving a keynote, and I had a slide on my keynotes for a long time that said 100% security does not exist. And I don't know why on this particular day, it was down in Orlando at a Gartner conference, several thousand people in the audience, I sort of ad-libbed, which I tend to do a lot. I sort of sense the energy of the audience and what I need to say. So I have a general idea of my presentation, but it's not memorized or scripted because I feel it's more authentic that way to connect with the audience. And something that day just had me turn around and just stare at that slide for a minute, stare at the audience, stare back at the slide, and then go, is that really true? What if I take a system and I turn it off and I destroy it and I break it into pieces and I burn it and I bury it in the ground under the White House? I think we're probably pretty close to 100% security there. Right? That data is probably 100% secure. So the reality is 100% security absolutely exists, my friends. It absolutely is a real thing. However, what is the other reality of that scenario I just laid out? It has no value. Functionality is zero. So this is when I started developing these laws and principles of cybersecurity that really make it easy to understand, which is imagine a chart where on the one side you have security and on the other side you have functionality, except they're inverse. So on the security side, we start at 100% and we go to 0. On the functionality side, we start at 0% and go to 100. So essentially, when you're at 100% security, you're at 0 functionality. And when you have 100% functionality, you have 0 security. So the real objective of a CISO is finding the sweet spot. What's the sweet spot where you have the functionality that's needed, that's required, but nothing additional, and security is properly balanced with that. It doesn't want to be all possible functionality because that's zero security. You don't want to have zero functionality, but there's that balance in there where you're having just the functionality that's needed or required with the security properly layered in. But the reality is you're never going to be 100% secure. Right? There's always going to be some exposure if you have any functionality, and any company that is in business, including government, has functionality. Therefore, it drives that we're never going to have 100% security, which leads us to the law of cyber. And it's funny because people love to debate this law with me going, the reality is this. You don't have to believe in the law of gravity. It doesn't take away the fact that it's still working, right? You can go to a 10-story building and you can say, I don't believe in gravity, and you can step off the building, and guess what? Whether you believe in gravity or not, because it's a law that's always at play, you will be introduced to gravity very quickly. And you'll go down very fast. So the point is, it doesn't matter whether you agree with laws, they are still at play no matter what. So the law of cybersecurity is every time you add functionality, you decrease security. Or to put it another way, every time you add functionality, you're increasing risk. So the job of a CISO is to understand the functionality, new functionality, added functionality, proposed functionality, and go in and identify what those risks or exposures are, and then do whatever you can to minimize or reduce those risks. So that's our key role of a CISO, is being honest about the risk. Being honest that we cannot be 100% secure. I've noticed this trend, and that's why I did this episode, because I've sat on some panels and I've read some articles and I've read some different things where it seems like CISOs are now all about the ego. Oh, our organization has the best security out of any company in the space. Or we are within the top 1% of all possible security. And all these claims of how secure and protect. And I'm like, why? That's not the job. That's not a badge of honor. To me, going in and saying you've never, ever had a breach or detected a breach or had a compromise, I'm not impressed. I'm sitting there going, how come you weren't fired? Because guess what? Every organization, no matter the size, is going to go in and have risk, have attacks, have exposures, have vulnerabilities. So to me, the CISO I'm impressed with is we've stopped or prevented thousands of attacks every day. We know we're missing some, but we have proper detection in place that we can detect, respond, and catch those attacks. And by the way, we've caught many successful attacks over the last years, but we've responded and reacted in a timely manner. It's all about this. Prevention is ideal, but detection is a must, right? We want to go in and stop what we can, recognizing you cannot prevent all attacks, and then detect and respond to everything else, which then brings us to this question of we shouldn't hide, we shouldn't lie, we should embrace the breach. Breaches are going to happen. Breaches are not a bad thing. Why are we afraid of them? Why do we hide? Why do we go in and say, no, 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 no? And the reason is it's because we think that it's a negative. Once again, security engineer mindset applied to a CISO is as dangerous as can possibly be. It's poison. From a security engineer standpoint, saying we're going to get breached, there are vulnerabilities, we are going to get exposed, is saying you're not doing your job. Because a security engineer is supposed to find all the vulnerabilities and make the organization so secure, regardless of money, budget, or any other relevant factors, right? So therefore, in their mind, breaches are bad. From a security engineer standpoint, they do not like a breach. But from a CISO standpoint, it's inevitable. It's something we have to recognize and we have to embrace. But here's the problem. We're not being honest. We're not being honest with ourselves. We're not being honest with our executives, and we're not making it crystal clear to them that breaches are going to happen. But Eric, how do you know that? The reason I know that is two factors. One, what happens when a breach occurs in an organization? When there's a major breach that happens, what is almost always going to occur? The CISO or whoever is responsible for security is going to get fired. That pretty much always happens, which means the executives are saying that a breach is unacceptable. They're in essence saying the CISO should have prevented all breaches, and because a breach occurred, the CISO failed to do their job, therefore, bye-bye, and we're kicking out the CISO. If companies truly were educated correctly and knew that they embraced the breach and recognized that breaches are okay, they wouldn't actually fire the CISO. They would promote or listen to the CISO more, because the reality is, in most cases, not all, now yes, there are some incompetent CISOs. I'm not saying every CISO is perfect. So there are some cases where a CISO should have been fired. But there's a lot where they shouldn't. And here's the differential. If your CISO was making you aware of the risks, and there were lots of risks, and you were ignoring them and not aligning them with your risk posture, you were not putting in the effort, resources, or energy to fix them. You said, yes, I know there's this risk and this risk and this risk and this. Yes, I recognize and I own all these risks. But we are just at a point in the business where we can't spend additional resources on that. Everything else is more important. And all those other crazy things that companies do is more important than this. But we as executives recognize that this risk has a 97% chance of occurring and will cost us $10 million. And we know that this risk has a 93% chance of occurring and will cost us $7 million. And we know that this, and as long as they fully recognize and understand that, then when a breach happens, if it's unacceptable, they should go back and say, the CISO warned us. This is exactly risk 2. They said it has a 97% chance of occurring. It was going to cost us $6 million, and it cost us $6 million. They were spot on. They were accurate. They were correct. We just did not listen. So either we're going to allow this to continue, or we're going to start listening to our CISO more. We're going to elevate our CISO to a point where we actually listen to what they say. Now, if it's a situation where the CISO never made them aware of those things and never told them and hid the truth, then yes, those CISOs should be let go. But that's really the differential that you as a world-class CISO gets to decide. Are you giving the executives the accurate data? You're not taking a side. Like I said, a lot of security engineers, if you bring them into a meeting to explain something because they believe it should be 100% secure, they will fight. We must do this, we must do this, we must do this, we must do this. And if they don't get the money, they're annoyed, they're frustrated, they're pissed off because this is a real risk and they should have got the money. As a CISO, I don't care whether I get the money or not. I care about the truth. I care about the options. And this is one of the big shifts that you must make to be a world-class CISO. Security engineers care about fixing the risk and the vulnerability. World-class CISOs care about what's doing best for the business. Now, there might be situations where the business is not doing very well and you might need to accept risk. The executive team has to be fully briefed, but they might be willing to accept risk. Or there might be cases where you're not willing to accept the risk. But the trick is this. What a lot of security engineers that are pretending to be CISOs do is they go into the executive team and they brief like this. There's a big risk. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. It's the worst thing on the planet. You must give me $300K or really bad things are going to happen. Give me $300K or really bad things are going to happen. And the executives have heard that before. The Chicken Little, the sky is falling. They've heard it before. They didn't spend and nothing bad happened. So they don't think it's real because they don't have the data. They don't have the accuracy. They don't realize the percent game that we're playing. And they think, oh, there's good old CISO, just want more money, and they don't approve it. And then when something bad happens, you get frustrated and you say, but I told them. No, you didn't. You basically are always saying bad things are going to happen, and once in a while you're correct. So no, you didn't accurately do it because you had a dog in the fight. All you cared about was getting your $300K. You didn't care about what was the best decision for the company. You didn't care about whether, in this case, accepting, not accepting, or doing alternative measures was applicable. All you wanted was the $300K, $300K, $300K. It's not being honest. It's not being upfront. Present the whole side and don't pick a dog in the fight. So what I do as a CISO is this. I go to the executive and say, listen, there's this risk that has a 97% chance of occurring. If it occurs, it will cost $10 million, and I have $300K to fix it. So we really have a couple of options here. Option one, accept the risk. Realizing there is a 97% chance that we could lose $10 million, but if the company's not doing well, the company is in bad shape, and we don't have a lot of resources, we might have to accept that. So that's one option. The other option is pay the $300K. Let's invest $300K. This is a new risk, something we didn't anticipate early in the year, and let's spend the $300K to mitigate and reduce that risk to an acceptable level. So that's another option. Another option is this particular application has only been generating a very small amount of revenue. It's eating up a lot of resources and a lot of time. And based on this new data of this significant security risk, it probably makes sense just to pull the plug. We don't really need the application. It's not really generating tons of revenue. Like I said, it's utilizing a lot of resources and time. So maybe the best bet is just to turn off this application, either long-term or short-term. So those are three options I'm presenting to you. You can come up with others, but I just wanted you to be aware. But I want you to recognize, if we do nothing, you're accepting option A. If we don't take the application offline, we don't spend money, we don't do anything else, then you are accepting a 97% risk of us losing $10 million. As long as we're all in agreement and we all are fully aware of that's what we're dealing with, we're good. That's the role of a CISO. An honest broker that presents all sides of the equation. They're honest and they're upfront. So the executives fully recognize that we have a risk and fully recognize the impact the risk can have, and fully recognizing that this is real. And that's the part when you get to world-class CISO, where you've built up so much credibility with the executive team of being accurate and correct that they trust and believe what you say. So it's very important as a CISO that we don't try to hide the truth. We don't try to cover up the truth, but we own the truth. And the truth is, we're not going to be 100% secure. Risks are going to happen, and we just have to be upfront and honest about them. And the other reason why I put together this episode of this podcast is because some of the recent things that have been happening in the news over the last couple of years, which is personal liability against CISOs. You might have seen this, but there are a couple of breach cases where the SEC is now holding the CISO liable for withholding information, falsifying information, or lying about information. In one case, the company had an attack, a ransomware, and because the CISO was so concerned about their reputation, they were a security engineer pretending to be a CISO, because a real CISO wouldn't have been in the situation. So it was evident this was a security engineer that had no right having the CISO title, but they wanted to preserve their reputation of having the best security, being the best, and they didn't want to go to the executives and tell them they had a breach and tell them that we had to pay the ransom. So out of their own budget, they hid and falsified and paid the ransom and didn't tell anybody. So none of the executives, none of the shareholders, nobody knew that the company was attacked. Nobody knew that the company paid a ransom except the CISO and a very small number of people on their team. That's not world-class CISO. You should have educated the executives that this was going to happen. The threat of a ransomware attack should have been so real that it was not a surprise to anybody. And then you have such a good reputation that you go to the executive saying, listen, I told you this had an 80% chance. I told you this could have happened. We decided to accept the risk, and now here we are, faced with a $400K ransom payment. Now let's look at our options. We don't pay, we pay, and then we go through that same risk formula with that executive team. So that's the trick. You need to make sure that the executives recognize that 100% security doesn't exist. They know the law of cybersecurity, and they recognize that attacks and breaches are going to happen. So instead of hiding and being ashamed or trying to cover up, world-class CISOs know the truth. They're honest with their executives, and instead of hiding the breach, they embrace and own the breach.